Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
Dawn bloomed over Hogwarts in gentle rose-pink hues as Dobby descended to the castle cellars, carrying an enormous laundry basket. His large green eyes sparkled with contentment, for tidying up after the winter holidays was one of his most cherished activities. Every speck of dust he swept away, every cobweb he carefully removed, brought the castle closer to its perfect state. The Hogwarts kitchens had already awakened and filled with the aromas of freshly baked bread and bubbling porridge. House elves bustled between enormous cauldrons, preparing breakfast for hundreds of students. Dobby waved cheerfully to his colleagues and hurried towards the deepest cellars, those chambers used only for storing old utensils and forgotten items. Dobby knows everything must be made sparkling clean, he muttered to himself, untying his bundle of cleaning cloths. Even the old cellars deserve proper care. The first chamber was filled with copper cauldrons, blackened with age. Dobby began polishing them, humming a quiet melody. Light from his lantern reflected off the cleaned metal, casting warm golden glimmers across the stone walls. In the second chamber stood rows of wooden barrels that had once held wine and butterbeer. The air here smelled of ancient celebrations and cozy evenings by the fireplace. Dobby carefully wiped dust from each barrel, imagining what wonderful beverages had once been stored within them. The third chamber was the smallest. Here various odds and ends were piled: cracked porcelain plates, tarnished silver spoons, oddly shaped glass bottles. Dobby loved this room most of all. It reminded him of a treasure chest, full of little stories. It was here, whilst cleaning dust from a high shelf, that Dobby noticed something unusual. One of the bricks in the wall protruded slightly, as though time had shifted it from its place. When the elf ran his cloth across it, the brick slid aside easily, revealing a small alcove. "Oh," exclaimed Dobby, nearly dropping his lantern. His heart began beating faster with excitement. In the alcove lay a book. Not an ordinary book. It was bound in dark blue leather that shimmered in the lantern light like a starry sky. Golden runes gleamed on the cover, forming words in an unknown language. The book was small but heavy, as though it contained not words, but true treasures. Dobby carefully took it in his hands. The leather felt cool to the touch, yet pleasant like velvet. When he opened the cover, the book exhaled an aroma, a mixture of cinnamon, vanilla, and something else, unfamiliar, that reminded him of morning dew on mint leaves. On the first page, written in golden letters, were the words, "Culinary Astraria, or the Art of Temporal Cookery. Merlin Sweetmouth, head cook of Hogwarts, 1387 to 1445. Dobby's eyes widened. He didn't know who Merlin Sweetmouth was, but the title, Temporal Cookery, immediately captured his imagination. The elf carefully turned the page. Most of the text was written in those same golden runes, but here and there ordinary English words appeared. Many pages were damaged. Moisture and time had left dark stains on them, and some edges had crumbled away entirely. But the illustrations were incredible. On one page was drawn bread that glowed with gentle golden radiance. On another, a cauldron from which steam rose in the shape of tiny stars. Further on, a pie around which miniature butterflies danced, sparks of different colors falling from their wings. Dobby turned the pages, enchanted by the book's beauty. Finally, he came upon a page where the text was partially readable. At the top, in golden letters, was written, "Bread of the First Sun," and below, a recipe, partly in English. When spring touches the earth with its first ray, take of sprouting flour 3 handfuls, of Dauntear salt a small pinch. Knead in the hour when day is born. Bake until the rays kiss the crust. The rest of the recipe had vanished beneath a dark stain, but even these fragments enchanted Dobby. He imagined bread that glowed like a little sun, which could warm not only the body but the soul. Sprouting flour? Murmured the elf. Daunter's salt? What could this mean? He closed the book and pressed it to his chest. Dobby's heart was beating so loudly he feared someone might hear. But silence reigned all around. Only somewhere far away water gurgled in pipes and muffled sounds from the kitchen drifted down. Dobby quickly finished his cleaning, constantly thinking about his discovery. The book lay in his pocket, pleasantly heavy and warm. When he returned to the kitchen, the morning bustle was in full swing. Dozens of elves were preparing breakfast, and no one noticed Dobby's thoughtful expression. But Dobby himself suddenly began noticing things he'd never paid attention to before. There was an elf named Crumpet kneading dough for rolls, and the dough under her hands took on a golden tint. And there was Whisk grinding spices, and the aroma wafting from the mortar changed depending on how brightly the morning sun shone through the window. Dobby, a young elf with large blue eyes, approached him. This was Pip, the youngest of the kitchen assistants. Dobby looks thoughtful. Can Pip help? Dobby looked around. Pip had always been curious and inquisitive. Perhaps he would be able to understand this strange discovery? Pip, whispered Dobby, drawing the younger elf to a quiet corner. Have you ever noticed that food sometimes tastes different? Pip blinked in surprise. How so, Dobby? Food always tastes as it should taste. No, Dobby protested. For instance, soup that Crumpet makes on Monday and the same soup on Friday. They're different. Pip pondered this. Pip has never paid attention to this. But now that Dobby mentions it, perhaps there really is a difference. Dobby nodded and decided to trust his younger colleague. He pulled the book from his pocket. Dobby found this in the old cellar, he whispered. Pip gazed in wonder at the shimmering cover. This is a magical book, Dobby. Pip can feel it. It smells like old secrets and new possibilities. Together they turned several pages, examining the marvelous illustrations. Pip was particularly captivated by the drawing of the pie with butterflies. Dobby thinks he'll try to make this bread, said Dobby, pointing to the bread of the first sun recipe. But we must understand what these strange words mean. Sprouting flour, repeated Pip. Perhaps it's ordinary flour, but ground in some special way. And Donner salt? Asked Dobby. Tears dew. Pip suddenly exclaimed. Pip thinks it's dew. Early dew that falls at dawn. Dobby excitedly grasped the younger elf's hands. Pip, you're brilliant. Of course it's dew. And sprouting flour, perhaps it must be ground at dawn. They were so absorbed in discussion that they didn't notice an older cook approaching, an elf named Copper with a gray beard and stern look. What's all this secretive talk, he grumbled. Work won't do itself. Dobby quickly hid the book. Sorry, Copper. Dobby and Pip were just discussing new ways of making bread. Copper looked at them skeptically. New ways? Bread has been baked the same way for centuries. Why change anything? When Copper left, Dobby and Pip exchanged glances. They understood that not all elves would appreciate their experiments. Pip, whispered Dobby, would you like to help Dobby solve the mysteries of this book? Pip's eyes shone. Pip would love to. This will be the most exciting adventure of Pip's life. They agreed to meet late that evening when the main work was finished. For the rest of the day, Dobby worked as usual, cooking, cleaning, helping other elves. But his thoughts constantly returned to the mysterious book and its enigmatic recipes. When evening came and the kitchen finally quieted, Dobby and Pip met by the great fireplace. They spread the book on a wooden table and by firelight began carefully studying every word. Look, Pip, said Dobby, pointing to one of the illustrations. Here it shows how sunbeams fall on flour. Perhaps we really must grind grain at dawn. And here, Pip pointed to another picture. You can see someone collecting dew from grass. Look how it sparkles. They spent several hours trying to decipher the recipe. Gradually the picture became clearer. Sprouting flour was ordinary wheat flour, but ground at dawn. Daunter salt was salt mixed with morning dew. The hour when day is born meant the first minutes of sunrise. Pip understands, the younger elf suddenly exclaimed. This isn't just a recipe. It's It's a way to catch time and put it into food. Dobby nodded, feeling his heart quicken with excitement. Yes, and if Merlin Sweetmouth was right, then food prepared this way won't just be delicious. It will be truly magical. They decided that the next morning they would try to make bread of the first sun. Dobby hid the book in a safe place, and Pip promised to gather all the necessary ingredients. When Dobby went to bed that night, his head was full of plans and dreams. For the first time in a long while, he felt he was standing on the threshold of something truly important. Not just a new way of cooking, but a discovery that could change all of Hogwarts cookery. Outside the window, darkness gradually gave way to gray shades of pre-dawn. And somewhere in the castle depths, among old cauldrons and forgotten bottles, the mysterious book waited for its next riddle. Dobby fell asleep with a smile on his face, dreaming of bread that glowed with golden radiance, and of other wonders that still awaited him in the pages of the Culinary Astraria. Dobby woke an hour before sunrise, when the castle still slept in pre-dawn silence. His heart raced with excitement. Today he would attempt to create his first magical bread. The elf quietly slipped into the kitchen, where Pip was already waiting with a basket of ingredients. Pip couldn't sleep, whispered the younger elf, his blue eyes shining in the half-darkness. Pip kept thinking about the mysterious bread. Dobby smiled and retrieved the Culinary Astraria from its hiding place. By the light of a single candle, they once again examined the recipe for bread of the first sun. Now that they better understood the meaning of the strange words, the task seemed simpler, but no less thrilling. Sprouting flour, read Dobby. Pip, did you bring the hand quern? Pip nodded and placed a small stone quern on the table, the kind usually used for grinding spices. Beside it lay a small sack of select wheat, the finest Pip could find in the storerooms. And the dew? Asked Dobby. Pip prepared it. The younger elf showed a small glass vial filled with clear water. Pip collected it yesterday evening from the grass by the lake, very carefully drop by drop. Dobby took the vial and held it up to the candlelight. The dew shimmered as though tiny stars lived within it. Excellent, Pip. Now we must wait for dawn. They sat by the kitchen's great window, watching as the sky slowly changed color from black to dark gray, then to gentle violet. The castle around them breathed with peaceful sleep. Only occasionally came the quiet sound of footsteps in corridors or the creak of old floorboards. Dobby, whispered Pip, why do you think Merlin Sweetmouth created this book? Dobby pondered, gazing at the pages filled with mysterious runes. Perhaps he understood something important about time and food. Something we've forgotten. What if the bread really does glow? Pip's eyes widened with wonder. Then, Dobby smiled. We'll discover that magic can exist not only in spells, but in the simplest things. Finally, a thin strip of golden light appeared on the horizon. Dobby felt something change in the air, as though the entire world held its breath in anticipation of the new day. Now, he whispered. Pip began carefully pouring wheat grains into the quern. Dobby grasped the handle and began slowly turning the upper stone. At first, nothing special happened. Ordinary stone grinding against stone, the ordinary smell of grain. But when the first ray of sunlight touched the kitchen window and golden light fell upon the quern, something wonderful occurred. The flour streaming from beneath the stones began to shimmer. At first barely noticeable, then brighter and brighter, as though each particle caught the morning light and stored it within itself. Oh, Pip nearly dropped the grain sack. Look, Dobby. It really is turning golden. Dobby didn't stop grinding, enchanted by the sight. Flour accumulated in the bowl beneath the quern, and the entire bowl slowly filled with gentle golden radiance. When the last grain was ground, Dobby carefully collected the flour in a separate container. Now the Daunter salt, he said, taking the vial of dew. He sprinkled a pinch of sea salt onto his palm and added the dew drop by drop. The salt began to dissolve, but didn't disappear entirely. Instead, it transformed into tiny crystals that sparkled with different colors. Pip has never seen anything like this, whispered the younger elf in wonder. Next came the most crucial moment, kneading the dough. According to the recipe, this had to be done in the hour when day is born, meaning during the first minutes after sunrise. Dobby added warm water and a bit of yeast to the flour and began kneading. Pip helped, steadying the bowl. With each movement, the dough became more elastic, and its golden glow didn't fade, but rather spread throughout the entire mass. "Look at your hands, Dobby," exclaimed Pip. Dobby looked down and gasped in surprise. His palms, which touched the dough, also glowed faintly with golden radiance. The sensation was wonderful, as though warm, gentle energy flowed through the dough. When the dough was ready, they placed it to rise in a warm corner by the fireplace. According to the recipe, it should be baked until the rays kiss the crust, and Dobby understood this meant baking in direct sunlight. But here arose a problem. The kitchen had large windows, but they faced north, where the sun didn't reach. Dobby and Pip exchanged puzzled glances. "What if we take the bread to the roof?" suggested Pip. "To the roof?" Dobby pondered. "But there's no oven there." Suddenly nearly headless, Nick drifted into the kitchen. The ghost looked particularly transparent in the morning light, and his head swayed on its thin thread of flesh. "Good morning, dear elves," he greeted them. "What are you doing here that's so interesting? Oh, what is that marvelous glow?" Nick noticed the bowl of dough, which shimmered faintly with golden light. "Sir Nicholas," Dobby bowed, we're trying to make special bread from an ancient recipe." The ghost floated closer, his silvery eyes widening with curiosity. "An ancient recipe? This wouldn't happen to be from the time of Merlin Sweetmouth, would it?" "You knew Merlin Sweetmouth?" asked Pip excitedly. Nick laughed. The sound was like wind chimes. "Of course. I've been here since 1492. Merlin died when I was, about 15. But I remember the stories about him. They said he could cook dishes that could heal not only the body but the soul, and that his bread could glow in darkness." "Glow in darkness," repeated Dobby. "So it's true." "Absolutely true," nodded Nick. "As for your problem with baking in sunlight, you know, in the highest tower of the castle there's an old room with a magical fireplace. It can heat not with ordinary fire, but with sunlight itself. Merlin often used it for special dishes." Dobby's eyes lit up. "How do we get there?" "Go up the main staircase to the very top, then turn right to the narrow spiral staircase. The room will be just under the roof. Only be careful. No one's been there for ages." Nick was about to drift away, but suddenly turned back. "By the way, if your bread really turns out like Merlin's, it will have a special property. Whoever eats it will feel calm and clarity of thought all day. Just what students need before exams." When the ghost vanished, Dobby and Pip took up their task with renewed energy. The dough had risen well and glowed even brighter. They carefully shaped it into a small round loaf and set off for the mysterious room. Climbing through the castle proved a true adventure. They carried the bread in turns, trying not to disturb its shape. The stairs seemed endless, and the corridors like a maze. Several times they got lost, but the bread's golden glow seemed to show them the right direction. Finally, they found the narrow, spiral staircase. The room at the very top proved small but cozy. In the center stood a fireplace of unusual construction. Instead of logs, strange crystals lay within it, gathering and concentrating sunlight. "How do we light it?" asked Pip. Dobby looked at the illustration in the book. It showed an elf holding his hands over the fireplace and concentrating. "I'll try," he said and stretched his palms toward the crystals. At first, nothing happened. Then Dobby understood. He mustn't try to light a fire, but simply open his heart to sunlight. He closed his eyes and thought about the warmth of morning sun, about the golden glow of the dough, about the joy of discovery. The crystals blazed with soft golden flame. This wasn't ordinary fire. It didn't burn or scorch, but gently warmed, like summer sunshine. Dobby placed the bread in the fireplace on a special stand. Immediately wonders began. The bread's crust started changing color, shimmering from golden to pink, then to gentle orange. The kitchen filled with an aroma impossible to describe in words. It smelled of morning sun, fresh air, and something so dear and warm that tears of joy filled their eyes. "Pip can't believe his eyes," whispered the younger elf. "This is real magic." The baking didn't take long. When the sun rays streaming through the window touched the bread's crust, it glowed brighter than ever. Dobby understood. The bread was ready. They carefully removed it from the fireplace. The bread was perfect, a golden pink crust, crumb that glowed faintly with warm light. When Dobby cut it, inside was revealed the most beautiful bread he'd ever seen. The crumb was gentle cream-colored with golden veins, and each slice emanated barely visible radiance. "Shall we try it?" asked Pip, looking at the slice of bread with reverence. Dobby nodded. They simultaneously bit into their pieces. The taste was incredible. This wasn't just bread. It was the embodiment of morning freshness, dawn's peace, and the joy of a new day. Each bite seemed to fill the body with warmth and energy, and the soul with deep harmony. "Dobby," whispered Pip, his voice trembling with wonder, "we've created a true miracle." Dobby nodded, unable to find words. He felt his entire being filled with calm and clarity. His thoughts became sharper, and his heart beat steadily and confidently. They returned to the kitchen with the remaining bread, which still glowed faintly. Other elves had already awakened and were preparing breakfast. Crumpet was first to notice their appearance. "Dobby, Pip, where have you been? And what's that strange bread?" Dobby and Pip exchanged glances. How could they explain what they'd experienced? "We experimented with a new recipe," said Dobby carefully. Crumpet came closer and sniffed. "It smells incredible. And why is it glowing?" Before Dobby could answer, Copper appeared with his usual gruff expression. "What's all this fuss? And what's that?" "Oh, Merlin's beard." The senior cook saw the bread, and his eyes widened. "This can't be bread of the first son." All the elves in the kitchen froze. Even those who didn't know what it meant could feel something special was happening. "Copper," asked Dobby quietly, "do you know this recipe?" The elder elf slowly approached the bread, his hands trembling. "My grandfather told me about Merlin Sweetmouth. Said he could cook food that healed souls. But the recipes were lost centuries ago." "Not all of them," whispered Dobby and showed the Culinary Astraria. Copper carefully took the book, his eyes filling with tears. "I can't believe it. Where did you find this?" Dobby told about his discovery in the old cellar. All the elves listened with fascination, and when he finished, Crumpet quietly asked, May we try this bread?" Dobby smiled and cut the bread into small pieces for everyone. When the elves tasted it, a wave of amazed exclamations and sighs of pleasure swept through the kitchen. "This is incredible," exclaimed Crumpet. "I feel so calm, and my thoughts have become clearer," added young Ladle. "The tiredness is completely gone," confirmed Whisk. Copper was silent for a long time, then looked at Dobby with new respect. "You've discovered something very important, Dobby. This knowledge could help not only us, but all of Hogwarts." "But Dobby wants to learn more," said the elf, carefully taking back the book. "There are many more recipes in it. Pip will help Dobby solve them." Pip nodded energetically. Pip is ready to help always. That day, work in the kitchen progressed incredibly smoothly. All the elves who had tasted the magical bread worked with special ease and joy. Even Copper smiled from time to time, which was a rarity. When evening came, Dobby and Pip met again by the fireplace with the book. Now they knew that Merlin Sweetmouth's secrets were real. Ahead lay new riddles, new experiments, and new wonders. "Look, Pip," said Dobby, turning the pages. "Here's a recipe for soup of eternal summer. It says it can warm in winter better than any fireplace." Pip leaned closer, his eyes shining with curiosity. "What are these strange drawings?" On the page was depicted a cauldron from which steam rose in the shape of tiny suns. Around the cauldron grew flowers, and the air seemed to shimmer with heat. "Pip thinks tomorrow we'll be making something magical again," smiled the younger elf. Dobby nodded, feeling his heart fill with anticipation of new adventures. The first step had been taken, and it proved successful. Now ahead lay a long path to understanding all the secrets of the Culinary Astraria. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in pink and orange hues. And in Hogwarts' cozy kitchen, Two elves planned their next culinary experiments, knowing that Merlin Sweetmouth's secrets would live forever in their hands and hearts. The week following the success of the bread of the first sun flew by like a single day. Dobby and Pip met each evening by the fireplace, attempting to decipher the next recipe from the Culinary Astraria. The soup of eternal summer proved a far more complex puzzle than the bread. The recipe was written in more intricate runes, and many pages surrounding it were seriously damaged. Dobby could make out only isolated phrases. When the sun reaches its highest peak, roots that drank light for centuries, leaves that danced with wind all summer long. Pip thinks this is about the summer solstice, said the younger elf, carefully studying the illustration where a cauldron was depicted surrounded by dancing sun rays. But the summer solstice has already passed, sighed Dobby. It's mid-February now. What if we don't need to wait for real summer? Pip suddenly exclaimed. Look at this drawing. He pointed to a page showing an elf holding hands over a pile of dried herbs. From the herbs rose golden radiance, and around them danced miniature suns. Dobby looked closely. You think these herbs store summer energy within themselves? Exactly. Pip's eyes shone. Just as the flowers store dawn's energy, herbs can store summer's energy. The next day, they set out on their search. First, Dobby visited Professor Sprout. She was very busy in the greenhouse, repotting young mandrakes, but gladly answered Dobby's questions. Herbs that store summer energy, she repeated, wiping her dirty hands on her apron. Of course, many plants have the ability to accumulate solar energy. For instance, sunflower root, dried on the summer solstice, can warm better than any charms. And lime leaves, gathered on the hottest day of the year, retain heat for months. Where might one find such plants? Asked Dobby. Professor Sprout pondered. I have a small collection in my greenhouse, but the finest specimens grow in the old garden on the roof. No one's climbed up there for years, but there are true treasures there. She gave Dobby a small key. Go up the eastern stairs to the very top. Be careful, it might be slippery. Dobby thanked her and hurried to Pip. Together they set off for the mysterious rooftop garden. The climb proved a true adventure. The eastern stairs were narrower and steeper than those leading to the magical fireplace. The stone steps were covered with a thin layer of ice, and the elves had to hold onto the walls to avoid falling. Pip thinks this is one of those times we should have brought a lantern, muttered the younger elf when they found themselves in a particularly dark spot. But when they finally reached the metal door at the very top and Dobby turned the key in the lock, their efforts were rewarded. The rooftop garden proved a true fairy tale. Despite the winter cold, plants grew here that seemed oblivious to the season. Some flowers still bloomed, radiating barely perceptible warmth. Herb bushes swayed in the wind, but their leaves remained green and succulent. This is incredible, whispered Dobby, gazing at the beds neatly divided by stone pathways. How do they grow in such cold? Pip approached a large bush with golden leaves. Look, Dobby, this bush is warm. Indeed, when Dobby stretched his hand toward the plant, he felt pleasant warmth, like summer sunshine. And when he touched a leaf, it glowed faintly beneath his fingers. They spent an hour exploring the garden. Dozens of different plants grew here, and many had wondrous properties. One plant's root was warm to the touch, another's leaves smelled of summer rain, and a third's flowers radiated barely visible golden light. Here they are, the ingredients for the soup, exclaimed Dobby, carefully cutting leaves and digging up small roots. When they returned to the kitchen with a full basket of summer treasures, the sun was already setting. Dobby spread his finds on the great table and once again opened the Culinary Astraria. Now that he had real summer ingredients, the recipe began making sense. Roots that drank light for centuries were sunflower roots from the roof. Leaves that danced with wind all summer long were lime and mint leaves that retained the scent of warm days. What does this mean? Pip pointed to a particularly puzzling line. Add a drop of memory from a hottest day. Dobby pondered. Suddenly it struck him.
Pip.
What if this drop of memory is water that's been stored since summer? Rainwater. Pip exclaimed joyfully. In the cellars, there are barrels of rainwater collected during summer. They hurried to the cellars and indeed found old oak barrels labeled June, July, August. The water in them was crystal clear and smelled of summer storms. Returning to the kitchen, they began preparing the soup. First, Dobby placed sunflower roots in a large cauldron. As soon as they touched the metal, the cauldron began warming slightly, as though an invisible flame burned within it. Then he added lime and mint leaves. The aroma that filled the kitchen was incredible. It smelled of freshly cut grass, warm wind, and honey. "Now the rainwater," said Dobby, carefully pouring water from the summer barrel. As soon as the water touched the ingredients, a miracle occurred. The cauldron blazed with golden light, and steam rose from it that didn't dissipate, but formed tiny clouds circling beneath the ceiling. "Pip can't believe his eyes," whispered the younger elf in wonder. Dobby continued adding ingredients according to the recipe: chamomile flowers that glowed like little suns, sunflower seeds that crackled and sparkled when they hit the cauldron, and wormwood leaves that made the air around them warmer. The most difficult part was deciphering the final ingredient: breath of a scorching day. Dobby and Pip puzzled over this until Pip remembered the dried herb bundles hanging from the ceiling. "Look," he pointed to a bundle of herbs gathered on the hottest day in July. When Pip untied it, a wave of warm air rose from the herbs, like a summer breeze. Dobby added the herbs to the soup, and the cauldron shone even brighter. Now the soup resembled a little sun, golden, warm, radiating comfort and peace. "How long should it cook?" asked Pip. Dobby consulted the book again. "Until winter retreats from the heart," he read. What could this mean? They waited an hour, 2 hours. The soup continued bubbling and glowing, but Dobby felt something wasn't right. Finally, he understood. "Pip, what if winter in the heart is about us? About what we feel?" The younger elf pondered. "Pip understands. We must wait until we ourselves feel summer warmth." They sat by the cauldron and began concentrating on the warmth emanating from the soup. Gradually, the cold of the winter evening began retreating. Dobby felt his body filling with pleasant warmth, and his thoughts becoming light and joyful, as on a summer day. "Now," he said, when he felt winter had finally left his heart. He removed the cauldron from the fire. The soup had an incredible golden color and smelled like a summer garden after rain. When Dobby ladled it into bowls, each bowl glowed faintly with warm light. The first spoonful was a revelation. This wasn't just soup. It was the embodiment of the finest summer day. Warmth spread through the body, warming every cell. The cold winter evening seemed a distant memory. "Dobby, this is magic," exclaimed Pip, his cheeks flushed with warmth. Pip feels as though he's sitting in a meadow on a sunny day. Dobby nodded, unable to find words. He felt his entire body filling with energy and joy. Even the air around them had grown warmer. Suddenly Crumpet entered the kitchen, wrapped in a thick cloak. "BRR, what a cold night," she muttered, but suddenly stopped. "Why is it so warm here? And what's that wonderful smell?" Dobby and Pip exchanged glances and smiled. "Crumpet, would you like to try some soup?" offered Dobby. He ladled her a bowl of golden soup. Crumpet tasted it carefully and immediately beamed. "Goodness. I feel as though I've stepped into a greenhouse." She threw off her cloak. "This is incredible. How did you do this?" Soon other elves began coming to the kitchen, drawn by the wonderful aroma and rumors of miraculous soup. Everyone who tasted it immediately blossomed with warmth and joy. Copper was particularly impressed. "This soup could replace all warming charms in the castle," he said, finishing his second helping. "The students will be delighted." "What if we prepare a large cauldron for lunch tomorrow?" suggested Crumpet. Dobby looked at his Culinary Astraria. He still had plenty of ingredients from the roof, and the recipe now seemed clear. "Dobby will try," he said. "But we'll need to go to the roof for fresh herbs." "Pip will help." Pip immediately responded. The next day they prepared an enormous cauldron of soup of eternal summer. When students came for lunch in the Great Hall, they were greeted by an incredible aroma of summer. The first spoonful caused a wave of amazed exclamations. Students who had been shivering with cold a minute before began removing their cloaks and jumpers. Laughter and cheerful chatter filled the hall. "What kind of soup is this?" asked a Gryffindor student. "I feel as though I'm sitting by a fireplace in summer." "I feel like I'm running on warm sand," added a Hufflepuff girl. Even the stern Slytherins and thoughtful Ravenclaws couldn't hide their delight. The entire great hall filled with warmth and coziness. Professor McGonagall came to the kitchen after lunch. "House elves," she said solemnly, "this soup is a true miracle." The students have been in wonderful spirits all day, despite the bitter frost outside the windows. "What is this new recipe?" Dobby modestly told her about his experiments with ancient culinary techniques. The professor listened with great attention. "You're doing important work," she said finally. "Such dishes can not only feed the body but warm the soul. Continue your research." That evening, Dobby and Pip sat again by the fireplace with the Culinary Astraria. Now they had 2 successful recipes, and they felt like true researchers. "Look, Pip," said Dobby, turning the pages. "Here's another interesting recipe. Pie of tree memory. It says it can show memories." Pip examined the illustration, where a pie was drawn with tiny images rising from it: leaves, flowers, birds. "Pip thinks this will be the most difficult puzzle," he said. But after the soup, Pip is ready for any challenge. Dobby smiled, feeling his heart fill with anticipation of new adventures. Summer in a cauldron had proved reality, and who knew what other wonders lay hidden in Merlin Sweetmouth's wisdom. Outside the window, cold February wind howled, but in Hogwarts' cozy kitchen eternal summer reigned, warm, joyful, and full of new possibilities. And in the ancient book new secrets waited, ready to reveal themselves to those brave enough to seek them. Dobby placed his hand on the page with the pie recipe and smiled. Tomorrow would bring a new day, and with it, a new riddle to solve. March came to Hogwarts with unexpected thaw. Snow melted, forming cheerful streams that trickled from the rooftops, and the air filled with promises of spring. Dobby and Pip had spent several weeks studying the recipe for Pie of Tree Memory, and it proved the most complex riddle of all they'd encountered. The recipe was written in particularly enigmatic language, and the illustrations seemed alive. Tiny leaves in the drawings rustled when looked upon, and birds flapped their wings. Strangest of all was that each time they opened the page, the images changed slightly, as though the picture was telling different stories. "Pip doesn't understand this line," said the younger elf, pointing to a particularly tangled passage. "It says, 'Take flour from grain that grew beneath the crowns of wise witnesses.' What does this mean?" Dobby thoughtfully scratched his ear. "Wise witnesses. Perhaps it's about old trees? Those that grew for a very long time and saw many events." And here, Pip turned the page. It mentions sap of autumn melancholy and honey of spring hopes. How can one collect melancholy? They sat until late into the night, trying to decipher at least part of the recipe. Finally, Dobby decided to seek help from someone who knew more about trees and their secrets. The next morning, he set off to the Forbidden Forest to find Hagrid. The gamekeeper was just feeding hippogriffs near his hut, whistling a cheerful tune. "Dobby," Hagrid greeted him joyfully upon seeing the elf. "What brings you here on such a morning? Want to meet the new hippogriffs?" "Hagrid," Dobby bowed. "Dobby wants to ask about trees. About very old trees that might be called wise witnesses." Hagrid's eyes sparkled with interest. I see. You must mean the ancient oaks? Deep in the forest grow oaks over 1,000 years old. They say they remember the time of Hogwarts founders. Some of them even speak, if you know how to listen." "Speak." Dobby was surprised. "Well, not with words, of course," Hagrid laughed. "But they can share memories through leaves, bark, even acorns. An ancient oak remembers everything that happened beneath its crown. Want me to show you the way?" Dobby gladly agreed. Together they walked deeper into the Forbidden Forest, where paths became narrower and trees taller and older. Hagrid told stories about forest dwellers, warned of dangerous places, and pointed out interesting plants. "Here we are," he said finally, stopping at a clearing where enormous oaks grew. Dobby gasped in wonder. The trees were truly impressive. their trunks so thick that 10 people couldn't embrace them, and their crowns lost somewhere high in the sky. But strangest of all was that the trees seemed to radiate a sense of peace and ancient wisdom. How does one address them? Dobby asked quietly. Just sit by the trunk and place your palm against the bark, Hagrid replied. Think about what you want to know. Only be patient. Ancient oaks don't like haste. Dobby carefully approached the largest oak and placed his hand on the rough bark. At first he felt nothing but the cool texture of the tree. Then he closed his eyes and thought about the pie of tree memory, about Merlin Sweetmouth, and about the secrets he was trying to unravel. Suddenly images flashed in his consciousness. He saw this same oak, but younger, beneath which sat a man in blue robes with a long gray beard. The man was writing something in a book, and golden sparks flew around him. Merlin, whispered Dobby, understanding whom he was seeing. The image changed. Now he saw Merlin collecting acorns from this oak, but not ordinary ones, those that fell precisely when someone nearby experienced strong emotions. Joy, sadness, wonder, love. Each emotion left its trace in the acorn. Another image. Merlin preparing some dough, adding flour made from acorns. The dough began to glow, and tiny images rose from it, memories of whoever would eat it. Dobby opened his eyes, his heart racing with excitement. Now he understood. Flour from grain that grew beneath the crowns of wise witnesses meant flour from acorns that had absorbed human emotions and memories. Thank you, he whispered to the oak and carefully collected several acorns lying beneath the tree. Returning to the castle, Dobby excitedly told Pip about his discoveries. Together they tried to grind the acorns into flour, but it proved difficult. The acorns were very hard. Pip has an idea, the younger elf suddenly exclaimed. What if we soak them in water first? They left the acorns in water overnight. By morning the acorns had softened and could be ground. The flour from them was dark, with an unusual aroma. It smelled of forest, rain, and something mysterious. The next puzzle was sap of autumn melancholy. Dobby thought long about what this could mean until he remembered maple syrup collected in autumn. But ordinary syrup wouldn't do. Something special was needed. He turned again to Hagrid, who suggested the old maple near the 3 broomsticks. That maple is special, said the gamekeeper. It grows on the site of an old graveyard, and its sap is always a bit sad. Locals say it remembers everyone buried beneath its roots. Dobby and Pip traveled to the 3 broomsticks. Madame Rosmerta gladly helped them collect maple sap from the old tree. The sap was indeed special, darker than usual, with a taste of melancholy, but also with a sense of peace and acceptance. Honey of spring hopes proved simpler. Hagrid suggested that bees from the apiary near Hogsmeade collected special honey from the first spring flowers. This honey had a delicate taste and aroma that immediately lifted spirits. The most complex part of the recipe was the phrase, "Bake until the past comes to visit the present." Dobby and Pip couldn't understand what this meant for a long time. The answer came unexpectedly. When they first tried to bake the pie with all ingredients, it turned out ordinary, though very delicious. Dobby was disappointed, thinking he'd done something wrong. But then, when he tasted a piece, memories suddenly flashed in his head. Not his own, someone else's. He saw Hogwarts as it was centuries ago, felt emotions of people who once walked these corridors. Pip, he exclaimed, the pie works. It shows memories. Pip quickly tasted his piece and also gurgled with surprise. Pip sees children playing in a meadow. But those children are long gone. They understood that the pie was ready precisely when memories from the acorns began to emerge and share with those who ate it. The following days they experimented, perfecting the recipe. Each pie turned out slightly different. One showed memories of Hogwarts celebrations, another of quiet autumn walks, a third of first days at school. Most wonderful was that the pie didn't just show memories, it let you feel them. Dobby could feel the joy of long-past celebrations, graduates' nostalgia for school, first year's excitement. Dobby understands now why Merlin created this recipe, he told Pip one evening. He wanted people to be able to share memories, understand each other better. Pip nodded. Pip thinks this is the most beautiful magic of all we've seen. When they finally decided to share their discovery with other elves, the reaction was incredible. Crumpet, tasting the pie, saw memories of her grandmother elf who had worked in the castle many years ago. Copper felt memories of his apprenticeship under an old cook. "This isn't just food," said Copper, wiping away tears. This is a way to preserve memory of those no longer with us." Most unexpected was Professor Dumbledore's reaction when he visited the kitchen after hearing rumors about the wonderful pie. The headmaster tasted a small piece and remained silent for a long time, gazing somewhere into the distance. "Extraordinary," he finally said. "I see memories of Hogwarts from my childhood. But most wonderful is that they're not mine. These are memories of the castle itself, its walls and corridors." He looked at Dobby with deep respect. "You've restored very ancient and powerful magic, the kind that can strengthen bonds between generations and preserve history not in books, but in hearts." That evening, Dobby felt simultaneously proud and responsible. He understood that the pie of tree memory wasn't just a recipe, but a way to preserve the most precious thing people have, their memories and emotions. When he and Pip sat down with the Culinary Astraria to study the next recipe, the book held a surprise for them. On the final page, which had previously been blank, new text appeared, written in golden letters. "Whoever has reached this place has proved their readiness for the greatest secret. The banquet of 4 winds awaits one who has understood. True kitchen magic lies not in spells, but in love, patience, and the desire to share the best with others." Dobby and Pip exchanged excited glances. They understood that ahead lay their final challenge, a recipe that would unite all their knowledge and experience. "Banquet of 4 winds," repeated Pip. "Pip thinks this will be the most difficult task. But also the most important," added Dobby, feeling his heart fill with determination. Outside the window, March wind played with young leaves on trees, promising spring's swift arrival. And in Hogwarts' cozy kitchen, 2 elves prepared for their greatest culinary test, holding in their hands the keys to the most ancient secrets of magical cookery. Dobby looked at the page with the Banquet of 4 Winds recipe and smiled. Tomorrow would begin their greatest adventure in the world of culinary magic. April came to Hogwarts with wild blossoming and warm rains. Dobby and Pip had spent the last weeks carefully studying the recipe for the Banquet of 4 Winds. This was the most complex and enigmatic recipe of all they'd encountered in the Culinary Astraria. Unlike previous recipes, this one had no ordinary list of ingredients. Instead, the pages were filled with philosophical reflections on the nature of seasons, about how each time of year carries its own energy and wisdom. "Spring is awakening and hope," read Dobby aloud by the fireplace. "Summer is strength and flourishing. Autumn is wisdom and harvest. Winter is peace and contemplation. He who can unite all 4 winds in one dish will create a banquet that brings harmony and unity." Pip listened attentively, chewing his quill. Over the past months, he had changed greatly. From an inquisitive youngster, he had transformed into a true researcher of culinary magic. "Pip thinks we must use everything we've learned," he said. "Bread of the first sun for spring, soup of eternal summer for summer, pie of tree memory for autumn," Dobby continued. "But what for winter?" They turned the page and saw new text that had previously been hidden. "Winter brings not cold, but silence for reflection. Its dish is a draught that soothes the soul and grants wisdom. Snow draught, brewed from first snow and herbs that wintered beneath the earth, will bring peace and clarity of thought." Dobby pondered. Snow draught. But it's April now. Where shall we find first snow? "What if snow was collected in winter and stored?" suggested Pip. They went to the cellars and indeed found several barrels of pure snow that had been gathered for food storage. The snow was crystal clear and still cold. The following days they devoted to preparing for the most important culinary creation of their lives. They needed not just to prepare 4 separate dishes, but to make them create a single harmony. Dobby began with the spring part of the banquet. He again climbed at sunrise to the mysterious chamber with the magical fireplace and baked new bread of the first sun. But this time, he added flower petals to the dough, violets, daffodils, and tulips that grew in the rooftop garden. The bread turned out special, golden, with delicate colored veins and the aroma of spring freshness. When cut, it seemed as though spring itself breathed excitedly within. For the summer portion, Pip helped prepare soup of eternal summer, but they added new ingredients, sunbeams captured, with special crystals and water from hot springs that bubbled deep beneath the castle. The soup shone brighter than ever, and its aroma became so intense that even in April's coolness, it seemed blazing summer reigned all around. The autumn portion was represented by pie of tree memory, but for the banquet Dobby decided to make mini pies, each carrying memories of different autumn days, joyful harvests, quiet walks beneath golden leaves, cozy evenings by the fireplace. Most challenging proved the snow draft. Dobby experimented long with proportions until he found the perfect combination. Snow gathered on the quietest winter night, herbs that had wintered underground, and a drop of water from the castle's deepest spring. The draft turned out transparent, like liquid crystal, but when poured into a goblet, it began shimmering with cold lights, and from it came the aroma of winter silence and peace. When all 4 dishes were ready, Dobby and Pip understood that simply placing them together wasn't enough. According to the recipe, they had to be served in a special order and special way. Look, Pip pointed to the final illustration in the book. It showed a round table with 4 figures around it, each embodying one of the seasons. The banquet must be served so each guest feels a journey through all seasons, read Dobby. Begin with spring, pass through summer and autumn, end with winter. And then the soul will find harmony. They decided to hold a trial banquet for the other elves. In the great kitchen, they set a round table, decorated with flowers, leaves, and candles. The atmosphere was solemn and magical. When all the elves gathered, crumpet, copper, whisk, ladle, and others, Dobby began the ceremony. Today we shall take a journey through all seasons, he said solemnly. Each dish will bring its own wisdom and energy. He began with the bread of the first sun. When the elves tasted it, a wave of amazed sighs swept through the room. Everyone felt a surge of energy, optimism, and desire to begin something new. Pip feels as though waking from a long sleep, whispered the younger elf. Next came the soup of eternal summer. Warmth spread through the elves' bodies, and their faces glowed with satisfaction and strength. The crumpet even stood and performed a few dance steps. This is real-life force, she said, laughing. The autumn pies brought deeper emotions. Each elf saw memories, not only their own, but those who had worked in this kitchen before them. Copper wept quietly, remembering his old mentor. We're all part of one great story, he whispered. Finally came the turn of the snow draft. When the elves drank the transparent beverage, deep peace settled over the room. All the day's bustle and worries left them, leaving only clarity of thought and a sense of inner harmony. For several minutes, everyone sat in silence, enjoying the rare feeling of complete unity with the world and each other. Dobby, Copper finally said quietly, this isn't just food. This is real magic of life. All the elves nodded. They felt they had experienced something special, a journey not only through seasons, but through different states of the soul. When the banquet ended, Professor Dumbledore unexpectedly visited the kitchen, accompanied by other teachers, Professor McGonagall, Professor Snape, and Professor Sprout. Wonderful aromas led us here, smiled the headmaster. Might we also try this legendary banquet? Dobby nodded excitedly. Fortunately, he had prudently prepared slightly more dishes than needed for the elves. Carefully dividing the remainder into small portions, he served the professors each dish in proper sequence. The professor's reaction was incredible. Professor McGonagall, always restrained and serious, smiled so sincerely after the spring bread, like a child. Professor Snape, tasting the summer soup, momentarily forgot his gloominess and relaxed. Professor Sprout during the autumn pies saw memories of her first years working at Hogwarts and smiled quietly. And Professor Dumbledore, after the winter draft, sat long with closed eyes, radiating deep peace. Extraordinary, the headmaster finally said. "I felt a journey through all the years of my life, through all the seasons of my heart. This is true magic, not that which destroys, but that which unites and heals." He looked at Dobby with deep respect. "You've restored ancient wisdom that was lost centuries ago. Wisdom that true power lies not in spells, but in the ability to give others what they most need." "What do you plan to do with this knowledge?" asked Professor McGonagall. Dobby looked at Pip, then at the other elves. "Dobby wants to teach others. Pip already knows all the secrets. Perhaps we should create a school for elves, where they can learn about culinary magic." "Splendid idea," Dumbledore agreed. "But for now, how about arranging a proper banquet of Four Winds for the entire school? I think the students deserve such a celebration." Dobby's eyes lit up. Dobby would be very happy. The following week, an incredible celebration took place in the Great Hall. The long tables were decorated with symbols of all four seasons: spring flowers, summer gold, autumn leaves, and winter crystals. Students of all houses gathered together to celebrate not a competition victory or term's end, but simply the joy of being and the unity of all living creatures. When Dobby and Pip, helping other elves, served the banquet of Four Winds, a wave of delight swept through the hall. Students felt the same as the elves: a journey through seasons, harmony with nature, and deep unity with each other. Hostility between houses vanished. Gryffindors laughed together with Slytherins. Ravenclaws shared impressions with Hufflepuffs. For several hours, the Great Hall transformed into a place of true unity and understanding. The most touching moment was when all students together sang an ancient song about changing seasons. Their voices merged into one beautiful melody that rose to the enchanted ceiling and spread throughout the castle. When the celebration ended, Dobby returned to the kitchen with a heart overflowing with joy and pride. He had achieved his goal, not only solved the mysteries of the Culinary Astraria, but shared them with others. "Pip," he told the younger elf, "now you know everything Dobby knows. You're ready to become a teacher for other elves." Pip nodded, his eyes shining with determination. Pip is ready, and Pip promises that Merlin's secrets will never be forgotten again. That evening, Dobby opened the Culinary Astraria for the last time. On the final page appeared new writing in golden letters. "A true master of culinary magic is not one who knows the most complex recipes, but one who understands. The most powerful magic is born from love, generosity, and the desire to bring joy to others. You have walked this path, Dobby of Hogwarts. Now you are a bearer of ancient wisdom. Use it wisely." Beneath the inscription was a signature: "Merlin Sweetmouth, with gratitude and respect." Dobby smiled, feeling his heart fill with warmth. He understood this wasn't the end of his journey, but only the beginning. Ahead lay much work, teaching other elves, creating new recipes, passing wisdom to future generations. But most importantly, he had already accomplished, proved that true magic lies not in the power of destruction, but in the ability to unite, heal, and bring joy. Outside the window, April rain tapped softly against the glass, promising luxuriant blossoming and new discoveries. And in Hogwarts' cozy kitchen, Dobby and Pip planned their next culinary experiments, knowing that Merlin Sweetmouth's secrets would live forever in their hands and hearts. Dobby looked at the shelf where the Culinary Astraria now stood beside new notebooks in which he recorded his own recipes and discoveries. Someday these notebooks, too, would become treasures for future culinary mages. But for now he needed to prepare for tomorrow, which promised new adventures in the wonderful world of magical cookery. Dobby smiled and set to work, for the finest dishes are born from love, and there was enough love in his heart for all Hogwarts inhabitants and even more.